At 71, they ignored her at the nursing home until this poem went viral. Welcome back and enjoy the story. The world stops spinning for Francine when her daughter drops her off at Whispering Pines retirement community with 2 suitcases and a promise to visit every Sunday. At 71, Francine finds herself suddenly invisible. Staff members walk past without acknowledging her questions. Other residents exclude her from their social circles, and even the janitor seems not to notice when she waves. With her, arthritic hands clutching her beloved journal, Francine retreats to the solitude of her small room, where decades of unpublished poetry fill notebook after notebook. Francine stares out the window of her new room, watching as her daughter's car disappears down the long driveway. The cherry trees lining the entrance to Whispering Pines are in full bloom, their delicate pink blossoms offering a stark contrast to the heaviness in her heart. She places her worn leather journal on the windowsill and tries to find beauty in this unfamiliar landscape that is now supposed to be home. "Mrs. Jenkins, I've brought your medication," announces a nurse who barely makes eye contact before, placing a small paper cup on the bedside table. Before Francine can ask about the dinner schedule, the woman is gone, the door clicking shut behind her. Francine sits on the edge of her bed, the springs creaking beneath her slight frame. The walls are painted a pale institutional green that reminds her of the elementary school where she taught for 30 years. She runs her fingers along the spines of the notebooks stacked in her suitcase, decades of poetry, thoughts, and dreams that never found an audience beyond her own eyes. When her husband was alive, he would listen to her verses over morning coffee, his eyes crinkling at the corners when a particular line moved him. But he's been gone for 3 years now, and Francine's words have remained unspoken, trapped between pages like pressed flowers. That evening in the dining room, Francine approaches a table where 4 women are engaged in animated conversation. "Excuse me," she says softly. "Would it be all right if I joined you?" The woman with silver hair, styled in an elegant bob, looks up, her eyes scanning Francine briefly before returning to her companions. "I'm afraid these seats are saved," she says, though the table clearly has empty chairs. "Perhaps you could sit over there?" She gestures vaguely toward an empty table in the corner. Francine nods, swallowing the lump in her throat as she carries her tray to the solitary table. From across the room, she observes the social dynamics of her new home, the established circles, the easy laughter of people who have found their place, the invisible boundaries that she has yet to learn how to cross. That night, as moonlight spills across her small desk, Francine opens her journal and uncaps her pen. The words flow easily, a poem about invisibility forming on the page. For the first time since arriving at Whispering Pines, she feels a sense of purpose, a familiar comfort in the rhythm of her verses. During her first week, Francine discovers her room neighbor is a former literature professor who now struggles with memory loss. Dr. Gloria Thompson, a woman with wild white hair and kind eyes, often stands in the hallway, confused about which room is hers. Despite her condition, Francine notices how respectfully the staff treats her, bringing her favorite tea and addressing her as Professor. The stark contrast to Francine's own treatment plants a seed of determination. "Professor Thompson, would you like me to help you back to your room?" Francine offers one afternoon, finding the woman wandering the corridor in her bathrobe. Gloria looks at Francine with momentary clarity. "Do you know, young lady, that Emily Dickinson wrote nearly 1,800 poems, but only 10 were published during her lifetime?" "I didn't know the exact number," Francine admits, gently guiding Gloria toward her door. "But I've always loved her work." "A poet, are you?" Gloria asks, her eyes suddenly sharp with interest. "I used to be," Francine replies. "A long time ago." Gloria pats Francine's hand. "One is never a used-to-be poet, my dear. One either is or isn't. The words don't leave us. Sometimes they just wait patiently for us to return to them. The encounter leaves Francine thoughtful. She was once a schoolteacher with a passion for words that she abandoned for family obligations. Now, with nothing but time and memories, she decides to resurrect her forgotten dream. The next morning, Francine notices a flyer on the community bulletin board announcing a monthly talent show. She stands before it, considering the possibility of sharing her poetry publicly for the first time. The thought both terrifies and exhilarates her. With renewed purpose, Francine begins to observe Whispering Pines more carefully. She notices how some residents command attention, while others, like herself, seem to fade into the background. She watches as the staff fusses over a former judge, a retired surgeon, and of course Professor Thompson, while overlooking those whose accomplishments were perhaps less prestigious but no less significant. Francine spends her afternoons in the small garden behind the facility, a notebook balanced on her knees as she crafts poems about her observations. She writes about the gardener who whistles as he prunes the roses, the visiting grandchildren who bring temporary bursts of energy to the quiet halls, and the way the light changes throughout the day, creating shadows and bright spots across the worn carpet of the common room. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing, the Retirement Center hosts monthly talent shows that Francine observes from the back row. The events are surprisingly varied. A retired music teacher plays Chopin on the slightly out-of-tune piano. A former dancer demonstrates a gentle waltz with her walker positioned nearby. A man with trembling hands performs astonishing card tricks. The audience, mainly other residents and occasional family visitors, applauds enthusiastically after each performance. When Francine tentatively approaches the activities director to participate in the upcoming event, the woman barely looks up from her clipboard before dismissing her request. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Jenkins, but the program is already full," she says, checking items off her list. "Perhaps next month." "I only need a few minutes," Francine persists. "I'd like to read a poem I've written." The woman sighs, finally looking up. Poetry isn't really what our residents prefer. They enjoy more lively entertainment. Her eyes drift past Francine to greet a staff member. "Excuse me, I need to discuss something with Nurse Roberts." Francine stands there for a moment, invisible once again. She watches as the activities director chats animatedly with the nurse, laughing at something Francine can't hear. Slowly, she turns and makes her way back to her room, where she sits at her desk and stares at the blank page before her. That evening, Francine writes her first new poem in 30 years, pouring her feelings of invisibility onto the page. She titles it Transparent, and as the words flow from her pen, she feels a familiar catharsis that had been absent from her life for too long. The next morning, Francine notices a young man delivering breakfast trays. Unlike the other staff members, he makes eye contact with each resident, often exchanging a few personal words. When he reaches Francine's table, he smiles warmly. "Good morning, Mrs. Jenkins. I hope you slept well. I've brought you some extra strawberry jam. I noticed you seemed to enjoy it." Surprised by this small act of recognition, Francine stammers her thanks. The young man introduces himself as Nate, a kitchen worker who's been at Whispering Pines for just a few months. His gentle manner and genuine interest in the residents stands in stark contrast to the routine indifference Francine has grown accustomed to. As days pass, Francine begins to look forward to Nate's deliveries. He notices her always writing and, unlike others, expresses curiosity about her work. "What are you always writing, if you don't mind me asking?" Nate inquires one morning as he collects her breakfast tray. "Just poems," Francine replies, instinctively covering her notebook with her hand. "Nothing important. Nay, poetry is important, Nate says with such conviction that Francine looks up in surprise. My grandmother taught high school literature for 40 years. She always said poetry is how we make sense of the world. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was, Nate says, his eyes momentarily sad. She passed last year, but she left me her books, hundreds of them. I'm slowly working my way through her collection. From that morning on, Nate and Francine develop a routine. He brings her meals and stays for a few minutes to discuss a poem or book he's reading. Surprised by his interest, Francine hesitantly shares some of her work. Nate, whose grandmother taught him to appreciate poetry, is genuinely moved and encourages her to continue writing. Their friendship blossoms over the course of spring, as Francine finds her voice strengthened by having just one person who believes in her talent. Nate begins to bring her books from his grandmother's collection, volumes of Mary Oliver, Walt Whitman and Langston Hughes that inspire Francine to experiment with different styles and themes. The connection with Nate gives Francine a new perspective on her situation. Though still largely overlooked by the staff and other residents, she no longer feels completely invisible. She begins to venture out of her room more frequently, spending time in the common areas even when activities don't interest her, simply to observe and gather material for her poems. One afternoon, Francine notices an elderly man sitting alone in the garden, his gnarled hands resting on a cane. She recognizes him from meals. He always sits alone, much like herself. After a moment's hesitation, she approaches and introduces herself. I'm Gordon, he replies, his voice rough with disuse. I don't see many people out here. Everyone's too busy with those ridiculous bingo games. Francine smiles at his bluntness. I'm not much for bingo myself. I prefer the quiet out here. It's good for thinking. Thinking, Gordon repeats, nodding slowly. Now that's something most folks here don't do enough of. They sit in companionable silence for a while, watching butterflies dance among the late spring flowers. Before leaving, Francine mentions that she'll be in the garden the following afternoon as well, should he want company. Gordon gives a non-committal grunt, but when she returns the next day, he's waiting in the same spot, a thermos of coffee beside him and an extra cup for her. As April turns to May, Francine finds small connections forming, not just with Nate and occasionally Gordon, but with Gloria Thompson during her lucid moments, when they discuss poetry with a passion that temporarily bridges the gaps in the professor's memory. The changing dynamics at Whispering Pines inspire Francine to write more prolifically than she has in decades. Her poems evolve from expressions of loneliness and invisibility to more nuanced explorations of aging, memory, and the unexpected connections that can form even in the twilight years of life. Weeks turn into months, and Francine establishes a quiet routine. Mornings are spent writing in her room or the garden, afternoons often include conversations with Gloria or Gordon, and evenings feature brief but meaningful exchanges with Nate as he delivers dinner. Though still largely overlooked by the majority of staff and residents, Francine no longer feels the acute pain of invisibility that marked her arrival. But you can't help wondering, will this newfound connection be enough to truly help her overcome the indifference of others at Whispering Pines? Will her poetic voice ever find an audience beyond the sympathetic ear of a young kitchen worker? 6 weeks into her stay, Francine attends a community meeting where residents discuss problems with the facility. The meeting is held in the main common room, with the administrator, Mr. Phillips, standing at the front beside a whiteboard. The room is crowded, with most seats taken by the time Francine arrives. She finds a spot in the back row, her notebook clutched in her hands. Mr. Phillips, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and perpetually rushed demeanor, moves efficiently through his agenda, addressing concerns about menu options, scheduled activities, and visiting hours. Residents raise their hands to speak, some more insistently than others, and Mr. Phillips acknowledges them with varying degrees of attention. When Eleanor raises her hand to speak about inconsistent heating in the rooms, the administrator overlooks her repeatedly. Francine raises her arm higher, leaning forward slightly, but Mr. Phillips's gaze seems to pass right through her. After several minutes of being ignored while others are called upon, Francine begins to lower her hand, resigned to her usual invisibility. "Excuse me," a sharp voice cuts through the murmur of the room. "The lady in the blue cardigan has been trying to speak for 10 minutes. All heads turn toward the source of the interruption, a tall, elegant woman with steel-grey hair, whom Francine recognizes as one of the residents who had denied her a seat at their table during her first week. Vivian Davenport, a widow of a prominent local businessman, is known for her forthright manner and the deference she receives from staff. Mr. Phillips blinks in surprise. "I apologize, Mrs. Jenkins," Francine supplies, her voice stronger than she expected. "Francine Jenkins. Yes, Mrs. Jenkins. What was your concern?" Gathering her courage, Francine describes the heating issues in her wing of the building, how the temperature fluctuates unpredictably, leaving residents alternately shivering or overheated. She notes that she's mentioned this to the maintenance staff twice without resolution. Mr. Phillips nods, making a note on his clipboard. "I'll have someone look into that right away, Mrs. Jenkins. Thank you for bringing it to our attention." After the meeting, as residents filter out of the common room, Vivian approaches Francine. "They won't fix it unless you keep reminding them," she says without preamble. "I've been here 3 years. The squeaky wheel gets the oil, as they say." "Thank you for speaking up," Francine replies. "I was beginning to think I might be actually invisible." Vivian's stern expression softens slightly. "We all feel that way sometimes, especially at first." She hesitates, then adds, "We play bridge on Thursday afternoons in the sunroom. We could use a 4th player. Our regular died." She delivers, this last part matter-of-factly, without sentiment. Francine suppresses a smile at Vivian's directness. "I haven't played in years, but I'd be happy to join you. 3 o'clock. Don't be late. Dottie hates waiting." With that, Vivian walks away, her posture perfectly straight, despite her 80 years. This moment of advocacy creates an unexpected alliance between Francine and the usually standoffish Vivian. Thursday arrives, and Francine finds herself welcomed into a close-knit group of women who, under Vivian's lead, form a kind of aristocracy among the residents. Though initially intimidated, Francine discovers that beneath their polished exteriors, these women harbor the same fears and frustrations as she does. Dorothy, never Dottie, Vivian just calls me that to annoy me, is a retired nurse with a wicked sense of humor and a collection of stories that make Francine blush. Helen, the quietest of the group, was once a concert pianist, whose arthritic fingers can no longer manage the keys, but who can still play a masterful hand of bridge. "So what did you do before?" Dorothy asks Francine during their first game, as she shuffles the cards with practiced ease. "I taught elementary school," Francine replies. "3rd grade, mostly, and I wrote a bit. Poetry." "A poet!" Helen exclaims, her face lighting up. "How wonderful! Would you share something with us sometime?" Before Francine can respond, Vivian cuts in. "Let's focus on the game, shall we? Helen, you're dealing." But later, as they're finishing their tea, Vivian asks casually, "This poetry of yours, is it any good?" "I don't know," Francine admits. "I've never really shared it widely. My husband used to say he liked it." "Husbands are required to say such things," Dorothy quips, "but if you ever want an honest opinion, I'd be interested to read it." By summer, Francine has established a small circle of friends who appreciate her quiet wisdom and gentle humor. Through conversations with her new companions, she learns that many residents feel similarly overlooked. The Bridge Club becomes a sanctuary where they can voice their frustrations and share small triumphs. Francine begins writing poems about their collective experiences, capturing the dignity, fears, and hopes of people in their sunset years. She writes about Dorothy's struggle to accept help bathing after a lifetime of caring for others, about Helen's grief when her son cancels his monthly visit for the third time, about Vivian's carefully maintained facade of strength that occasionally cracks to reveal profound loneliness. "You've captured us perfectly," Helen says one afternoon, after Francine nervously shares a poem called The Bridge Players. "It's as though you've seen right into our hearts." Even Vivian, not usually given to sentiment, blinks rapidly and mutters something about the poor lighting affecting her eyes. Nate, who has continued his friendship with Francine, notices the positive change in her demeanor. "You seem different," he comments one evening as he lingers after delivering her dinner. "Happier." "I have friends now," Francine says, surprised at how significant those simple words feel. "And I'm writing more than I have in years." "That's wonderful," Nate says, his smile genuine. "Have you ever thought about sharing your poetry more widely? Beyond Whispering Pines, I mean." "Who would be interested in an old woman's musings?" Francine asks, shaking her head. "More people than you might think," Nate insists. "My grandmother used to say that good poetry speaks universal truths. Age doesn't matter when you're saying something real." When Nate suggests she create a simple blog to share her work, Francine initially laughs off the idea, believing no one would be interested in an elderly woman's musings. But the seed is planted, and when Nate offers to help her set it up, Francine finds herself agreeing, more to please him than out of any expectation of readership. With Nate's patient assistance during his breaks, Francine learns to navigate a laptop that her daughter left with her to stay connected. Together they create Sunset Verses, a simple blog where she posts weekly poems. The process is sometimes frustrating. Francine's arthritic fingers struggle with the keyboard, and the technology often confuses her. But there's also a sense of accomplishment when she sees her words displayed on the screen, available for anyone in the world to read. For 2 months, her only followers are Nate and Vivian, who prints copies to share with Dorothy and Helen. Francine continues writing, finding purpose in this creative outlet, even without a wide audience. She posts poems about the changing seasons, about memories that surface unexpectedly, about the complex emotions of aging in a world that values youth above all else. Have you ever felt overlooked or invisible in a place where you expected to be valued? Or do you know someone who has experienced this kind of treatment? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Everything changes when the retirement center's owner, a distant corporate figure, announces an upcoming visit. Mr. Phillips calls an emergency staff meeting, and suddenly Whispering Pines is abuzz with activity. Maintenance workers appear to fix long-ignored issues, including the temperamental heating in Francine's wing. The dining room menu improves dramatically, offering fresh fruits and vegetables that had been conspicuously absent. Staff members, who previously hurried past residents, now stop to chat, asking about their comfort and preferences. "It's like watching roaches scatter when the light comes on," Dorothy observes wryly as they watch the flurry of activity from their bridge table. "Suddenly we matter because the big boss is coming. It won't last," Vivian predicts. "A week after he leaves, we'll be back to those dreadful meatloaves and lukewarm coffee." Francine watches the transformation with a poet's eye, noting the superficial changes that fail to address the deeper issues of dignity and respect that are so often lacking in their daily lives. She writes a new poem titled Invisible But Seeing, a pointed yet poignant exploration of what it means to be overlooked but observant, forgotten but knowing. During this flurry, the activities director, Mrs. Simmons, approaches Francine in the common room. Unlike their previous interaction, she's smiling broadly and has clearly made an effort to remember Francine's name. "Mrs. Jenkins, just the person I was hoping to find." Her voice is unnaturally bright. "We're putting together a special newsletter for Mr. Harrington's visit. You know, the owner. And I remembered that you mentioned being a writer." Francine meets her gaze steadily. "A poet, yes." "Perfect. We'd love to feature some resident work in the newsletter. Would you happen to have anything appropriate we could include? Something cheerful about life at Whispering Pines, perhaps?" Remembering Francine's earlier request to participate in activities, she asks if Francine might have any little hobby projects to feature. The transparent attempt to now include her after months of dismissal would be amusing if it weren't. So insulting. Francine considers for a moment, then nods. "I have something I can share. When would you need it by?" "This afternoon, if possible. We're printing the newsletter tomorrow morning." "I'll bring it to your office after lunch," Francine promises. Back in her room, Francine reviews her recent poems. She briefly considers writing something new, something cheerful as requested, but quickly dismisses the idea. If they want her voice now, they'll get her authentic one, not a manufactured version designed to please corporate visitors. Francine quietly hands over a printout of her latest poem, Invisible but Seeing. Mrs. Simmons, skimming it quickly, includes it in the newsletter without much thought, clearly more concerned with completing her task than with the content of Francine's contribution. The newsletter, printed on glossy paper with color photographs of smiling residents engaged in various activities, many staged just for this publication, is distributed throughout Whispering Pines the day before Mr. Harrington's visit. Francine's poem appears on the third page, nestled between an announcement about upcoming building improvements and a feature on a resident's 90th birthday celebration. The morning of the visit dawns bright and clear. Residents are encouraged to attend a special luncheon where Mr. Harrington will speak briefly about the future of elder care at Whispering Pines and beyond. The dining room has been transformed with fresh flowers on every table and linen napkins instead of the usual paper ones. Mr. Harrington, a tall man with silver hair and an expensive suit, moves through the room shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with selected residents, those who present well, as Dorothy puts it. He stops at the Bridge Club's table, where Vivian engages him in a pointed discussion about the quality of medical care available on weekends. Throughout the luncheon, Francine observes the performance unfolding around her, staff members hovering solicitously, residents putting on their best faces, Mr. Harrington making grand statements about dignity and quality of life that bear little resemblance to their daily reality. She takes mental notes for a future poem, already composing lines in her head. The owner, impressed by the professional-looking newsletter, takes a copy back to corporate headquarters. That evening, his assistant, a young woman named Rachel, who has recently moved her own grandmother into assisted living, reads through the publication while eating dinner at her desk. When she reaches Francine's poem, she stops, struck by the raw truth captured in the simple verses. The next morning, Rachel asks Mr. Harrington if she can share the poem on the company's social media accounts. "It's really powerful," she explains, "and it shows how our facilities value residents' creative expressions." Mr. Harrington, always aware of good publicity opportunities, readily agrees. Rachel posts "Invisible but Seeing" on the company's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts, with a brief introduction about valuing the wisdom and creativity of seniors. Within days, Invisible but Seeing strikes a chord with thousands of readers who recognize their own elderly relatives' experiences in Francine's words. The post goes viral, shared by celebrities with aging parents and advocates for elder care. Reform. The poem's gentle yet unflinching portrayal of invisibility resonates with people across generations, but especially with older adults who have felt increasingly marginalized by society. The reactions begin to pour in. Comments from people thanking Francine for putting into words what their parents or grandparents could not express. Shares from nursing home staff promising to do better. Reposts from literary figures praising the poem's craftsmanship and heart. Will Francine's newfound recognition change her standing at Whispering Pines? And how will the administration respond when they realize the true meaning behind her seemingly innocent poem? Suddenly, Francine's phone rings with her astonished daughter on the line, asking if she's seen what's happening online. "Mum, you're trending on Twitter. Your poem has over 50,000 shares. There's a hashtag #UrgeInvisible but Seeing, where people are sharing their own experiences with elder care." Francine, who barely understands what trending means, is overwhelmed by this news. Her daughter promises to visit immediately, breaking her usual Sunday-only schedule to arrive that afternoon with printouts of the online responses to show her mother. When Lisa arrives at Whispering Pines, she finds the atmosphere strangely charged. Staff members who previously ignored Francine now smile nervously as they pass, and other residents approach her with newfound respect and curiosity. Mr. Phillips himself escorts Lisa to Francine's room, explaining that they're extremely proud of our resident poet and have always encouraged creative expression at Whispering Pines. Lisa, who remembers her mother's tearful phone calls during those first lonely weeks, raises an eyebrow but says nothing. She finds Francine sitting by the window, still trying to process the sudden attention. "Oh, Lisa," Francine says when she sees her daughter. "There must be some mistake. All this fuss over a simple poem." "Not simple, Mom. True. And that's what people are responding to, the truth of it." Lisa spreads out printouts of comments and shares across Francine's bed. "Look at what people are saying." Francine reads through the responses with growing amazement. People have found meaning in her words, recognition of their own experiences, validation of their feelings. One comment in particular brings tears to her eyes. "My mother died in a nursing home last year. I always felt she was being overlooked, but I didn't know how to fix it. This poem helps me understand what she might have been feeling. Thank you for giving her a voice, even now." "I never expected this," Francine whispers. "That's what makes it so powerful," Lisa replies, taking her mother's hand. "You weren't trying to go viral or make a statement. You were just telling your truth." The next morning, a local news crew arrives at Whispering Pines, requesting an interview with the poet laureate of elder wisdom. Mr. Phillips and Mrs. Simmons scramble to prepare a suitable setting in the common room, arranging flowers and comfortable chairs, while coaching staff on appropriate smiles and attentiveness for any background shots. Francine agrees to the interview with reluctance, uncomfortable with the sudden spotlight, but recognizing an opportunity to address issues that matter to her and her fellow residents. Nate helps her select a suitable outfit and offers encouragement before the cameras arrive. "Just be yourself," he advises. "That's what made your poem powerful, your honesty." The interview goes well, with Francine speaking eloquently about the creative process and her lifelong love of poetry. When the reporter asks about the inspiration behind Invisible but Seeing, Francine faces a moral dilemma. Tell the uncomfortable truth about her treatment at Whispering Pines, or play, along with the administration's narrative of supportive care. When journalists ask Francine about the supportive environment that nurtured her creativity, she faces a moral dilemma. Tell the uncomfortable truth, or play along with the administration's narrative. In a moment of quiet courage, Francine acknowledges Nate's encouragement while tactfully suggesting that all retirement communities could benefit from truly seeing their residents as individuals with ongoing contributions to make. Aging doesn't diminish our need to be heard, to be seen, to matter, she says, looking directly into the camera. Every person here has a lifetime of experience and wisdom. Some, like my friend Professor Thompson, have impressive credentials that command automatic respect. Others have lived quieter lives, but no less valuable ones. We all deserve to be treated with dignity. Her diplomatic response earns her the administration's gratitude, and more importantly, their newfound respect. After the news crew departs, Mr. Phillips approaches Francine with an unexpected request. Mrs. Jenkins, your perspective is valuable to us. We're forming a resident advisory committee to help improve life at Whispering Pines, and we'd be honored if you would consider joining. Francine agrees, seeing an opportunity to advocate for the changes that matter most to residents. Not fresh flowers and linen napkins during special events, but consistent respect and attention to their daily needs and concerns. Within weeks, Francine's blog attracts thousands of followers, mostly older women who find their own unspoken feelings in her verses. Her readership spans continents, with translations of Invisible But Seeing appearing in Spanish, French, Japanese, and a dozen other languages. Each new poem she posts receives hundreds of comments, creating a community of voices that have too often gone unheard. A small publishing house specializing in works by older authors offers to compile her poems into a collection titled Sunset Verses, with a foreword by a renowned poet who discovers her work online and recognizes its authentic voice. The publisher, a woman in her 60s, who started the company after facing age discrimination in her previous career, personally calls Francine to discuss the project. Your work speaks to so many people, she explains, not just the elderly, but anyone who has felt overlooked or undervalued. There's a universal quality to your observations that transcends the specific circumstance of aging. Francine, still adjusting to her new role as a public voice, agrees to the publication with a mixture of pride and trepidation. At 71, she is embarking on a career that most would consider long past beginning. The sudden attention brings changes to life at Whispering Pines as well. The administration, recognizing both a publicity opportunity and a genuine need for improvement, implements several of the suggestions from the newly formed Resident Advisory Committee. Staff members receive additional training in dignified elder care with an emphasis on respect and attentiveness. Maintenance issues are addressed more promptly, and the activities calendar expands to include more intellectually stimulating options alongside the usual bingo and crafts. As autumn approaches, Francine finds herself leading a weekly poetry workshop for fellow residents, her gentle teaching style drawing out others' long-dormant creativity. The administration, recognizing the positive publicity, renovates an unused sunroom into a creative writing space named in Francine's honor, the Jenkins Literary Salon. "You've changed this place," Vivian comments during one of their now daily coffee meetings in the garden. "6 months ago, they couldn't be bothered to learn my name correctly. Now the director himself asks about my arthritis treatment." "It wasn't me," Francine demurs. "It was all of us speaking up. It was your words that made people listen," Vivian insists, uncharacteristically earnest. "You made us visible again." Thus, the poetry workshop grows into a highlight of Whispering Pines' weekly schedule, with residents sharing pieces that range from humorous limericks about cafeteria food to moving reflections on loss and longing. Francine guides each participant with the same respect and attention that she wished for upon her arrival, creating a space where every voice matters. Nate, whose encouragement was instrumental in Francine's journey, continues to support her success while pursuing his own dreams. Inspired by their friendship, he enrolls in evening classes at the local community college, working toward a degree in gerontology. "You helped me see that this is what I want to do with my life," he tells Francine, working with seniors, making sure they're heard and respected. "I thought I was just passing time in this job, but now I know it's my calling." Francine's daughter, witnessing her mother's transformation from withdrawn to flourishing, admits she had worried the retirement home would diminish her mother's spirit. Instead, she watches in amazement as Francine builds a new identity that honors her lifelong passion rather than setting it aside for others' needs. "I feel like I'm getting to know you all over again, Mom," Lisa confesses during a Sunday visit. "I always knew you wrote poetry, but I never realized how important it was to you, how good you are at it." "I didn't know either," Francine admits. "I think I needed this time and space to discover that part of myself again." As the publication date for Sunset Verses approaches, Francine receives invitations to speak at other retirement communities about creative aging. Initially hesitant, she agrees to a few local appearances, always bringing along residents from her workshop to share their own creative work alongside hers. Her poetry collection becomes recommended reading for gerontology students and healthcare workers, offering insight into the emotional landscape of aging that textbooks often miss. When a national morning show interviews her about her unexpected rise to recognition, Francine uses the platform to speak about the importance of seeing the continued potential in older adults. "We don't stop growing or learning or creating just because we reach a certain age," she tells the host. "Sometimes we're just beginning to discover who we truly are and what we have to offer." Idle, the retirement center, now famous for nurturing literary talent, implements Francine's suggestion for a resident expertise program where each person's lifetime of knowledge is recognized and shared. Nate, inspired by Francine's mentorship, enrolls in evening classes to pursue his own dream of teaching gerontology. The success of Francine's poetry and the resulting improvements at Whispering Pines attract the attention of elder care advocates nationwide. Organizations invite her to speak at conferences, where her gentle but firm insistence on the dignity of aging resonates with both caregivers and administrators. Though she declines most invitations, preferring the quiet routine she's established, Francine does agree to record video messages that can be shared at training sessions. The most important thing, she emphasizes in these recordings, is not the activities or the amenities, but the simple acknowledgement that we exist as complete human beings with thoughts, feelings, and contributions to make. Being old doesn't mean being finished. Professor Thompson, whose cognitive decline continues, but who still has moments of clarity, becomes one of Francine's most enthusiastic workshop participants. During one session, she suddenly looks up from her paper with bright eyes. "I remember you," she says to Francine. "You're the teacher who writes poems about invisibility, but you're not invisible anymore, are you?" Francine smiles and takes her hand. "None of us are, Professor. Not anymore." As winter approaches, Francine's book, Sunset Verses, is published to critical acclaim. Literary reviewers praise its emotional honesty and technical skill, with several comparing her work to Mary Oliver's in its attention to the small miracles of everyday life. Sales steadily climb as word of mouth spreads, particularly among readers over 60 who rarely see their experiences reflected in contemporary literature. The royalties from the book allow Francine to help her daughter with some financial difficulties, a reversal of their usual roles that brings Lisa to tears when Francine presents her with a check. "I never thought I'd be able to help you this way," Francine admits. "I always felt like a burden, especially after your father died." "You were never a burden, Mom," Lisa says, though they both know there's a kernel of untruth in her protest. "But I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. Their relationship deepens as Lisa begins to see her mother not just as a parent who needs care, but as a woman with talents and wisdom that command respect. She begins to visit more frequently, sometimes bringing friends who want to meet the famous poet and get their copies of Sunset Verses signed. When a national morning show interviews her about her unexpected rise to recognition, Francine uses the platform to speak about the importance of seeing the continued potential in older adults. We don't stop growing or learning or creating just because we reach a certain age, she tells the host, who admits on air that the conversation has changed how she thinks about her own aging parents. Sometimes, the most important work of our lives is still ahead of us. Social media clips of the interview circulate widely, with the hashtag #NeverFinished joining Invisible But Seeing as rallying points for discussions about aging with dignity and purpose. Viewers are particularly moved by Francine's recitation of a new poem titled Beginning at 71, which celebrates the unexpected joy of discovering her voice after decades of silence. Will this momentum continue to build? And what new challenges might Francine face as she navigates this unexpected chapter of her life? Back at Whispering Pines, Francine's daily life finds a new rhythm. She rises early, writing at her desk as dawn breaks over the gardens. Mornings are devoted to her own work, afternoons to the poetry workshop and meetings of the resident advisory committee, and evenings to quiet conversations with her expanding circle of friends. Gordon, the gruff man from the garden who initially seemed so unapproachable, reveals himself to be a talented woodworker. Inspired by Francine's success, he begins crafting small wooden boxes to hold residents' treasures, photographs, letters, jewelry, each one uniquely designed for its recipient. When Francine receives hers, lined with velvet to protect her collection of fountain pens, she finds a note inside in Gordon's shaky handwriting. For the words yet to be written. The staff at Whispering Pines, now attentive to the individual, needs and histories of each resident, discovers that Gordon was once a master carpenter whose work appeared in architectural magazines. They convert a storage shed into a small workshop where he can practice his craft and teach interested residents basic woodworking skills. The transformation in his demeanor is remarkable, from isolated and bitter to engaged and purposeful. "You started something," Dorothy tells Francine as they watch Gordon patiently guiding Helen's hands as she sands a small jewelry box. "A revolution of visibility." "Not me," Francine insists. "Poetry did it. Words have power. Only when someone brave enough speaks them," Vivian adds, her usual sharpness softened by affection. As Christmas approaches, Whispering Pines organizes a holiday bazaar featuring crafts and art, created by residents, Gordon's woodwork, knitted items from the craft circle, and a special display of Francine's poetry, accompanied by photographs, taken by a resident who was once a professional photographer. The event is open to the public, and the local community turns out in unexpected numbers, curious to see the retirement center that has garnered so much positive attention in recent months. Francine sits at a small table, signing copies of Sunset Verses and chatting with visitors. A young woman approaches, clutching the book tightly. "My grandmother is in a facility much like this one," she says hesitantly. "She used to be a painter, but she hasn't picked up a brush since she moved there. I gave her your book, and yesterday she asked for her art supplies again." The woman's eyes fill with tears. "Thank you for helping me see her again, really see her." Moments like these both humble and inspire Francine. She never intended to become a spokesperson for the elderly, but she recognizes the responsibility that comes with her unexpected platform. She begins to collaborate with elder rights advocates, lending her poetic voice to their practical efforts to improve conditions and policies in retirement facilities nationwide. The retirement centre, now famous for nurturing literary talent, implements Francine's suggestion for a resident expertise program, where each person's lifetime of knowledge is recognized and shared. Former teachers offer tutoring to struggling local students. A retired accountant provides tax preparation assistance. A woman who worked as a seamstress for a theatre company leads costume design workshops for the local high school drama department. Nate, inspired by Francine's mentorship, enrolls in evening classes to pursue his own dream of teaching gerontology. He continues to work at Whispering Pines, but now with a clearer sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of the residents in his care. "You're changing lives here," he tells Francine one afternoon as they share tea in the garden. "Not just the residents, but the staffs too. We're all looking at aging differently because of you." "Because of poetry," Francine corrects him gently. "It helps us see what was always there, waiting to be noticed." As winter deepens, bringing snow that transforms Whispering Pines into a postcard-perfect scene, Francine faces her first significant health challenge since arriving at the facility. A persistent cough develops into pneumonia, requiring a brief hospitalization. The experience is frightening, but also revealing. The staff's concern is genuine. Her friends rally around her, and her daughter arrives immediately, having rearranged her work schedule without hesitation. During her recovery, confined to her room but surrounded by cards, flowers, and frequent visitors, Francine reflects on the journey of the past year. She had arrived at Whispering Pines feeling discarded and invisible, certain that her life's meaningful chapters had concluded. Now, at 72, she finds herself more visible, more purposeful, and more connected than she has been in decades. This period of enforced rest also gives Francine time to consider her next creative project. While Sunset Verses continues to find readers, she feels drawn to a new challenge, a collection that explores not just the experience of aging, but the unexpected joy of beginning again when most assume you are finished. 1 year after arriving as an invisible woman with 2 suitcases, Francine celebrates her 72nd birthday, surrounded by friends, respect, and purpose. The dining room is decorated with streamers and balloons. A cake, adorned with a fountain, pen crafted from icing takes center stage, and residents and staff alike join in singing Happy Birthday with genuine warmth. Lisa has arranged a special surprise, copies of international editions of Sunset Verses in 5 languages, each with Francine's words reaching new readers across continents. The small table in Francine's room will hardly accommodate these new treasures, but they represent something precious, the universal resonance of her honest voice. Later that evening, alone in her room with a cup of tea, Francine opens her journal to a blank page. The woman who arrived at Whispering Pines a year ago, believing herself invisible, now writes with the confidence of someone who knows she is not only seen but heard. Her journey from overlooked to influential reminds everyone that a person's value never diminishes with age. Sometimes, the most powerful voices are those that society has been too busy to hear. As she begins to write the first lines of a new poem form, "At 72, I am visible again, not as I once was, young and uncertain, but as I am now, older, wiser, and finally speaking in my own true voice." Her arthritic hands move slowly across the page, but the words flow with a sureness that comes from knowing exactly who she is and what she has to say. Outside her window, snow continues to fall, covering Whispering Pines in a blanket of white that will eventually melt to reveal new growth beneath. Like the seasons, Francine has discovered that life continues its cycle of endings and beginnings, regardless of age, and that beauty can be found in every stage of the journey. The poetry workshop she leads has expanded to include residents, from other nearby retirement communities who travel to Whispering Pines twice monthly for sessions. Their collective writings are being compiled into an anthology titled Late Bloomers, celebrating creativity that emerges or re-emerges in the later stages of life. "You've created a movement," Mr. Phillips tells Francine during a meeting of the Resident Advisory Committee. "Other facilities are implementing similar programs based on what we've done here." Francine smiles at this, pleased not by personal recognition, but by the ripple effects that are improving lives beyond the boundaries of Whispering Pines. Her own experience of invisibility has led to greater visibility for thousands of older adults previously overlooked and underestimated. As spring approaches once again, bringing the cherry blossoms back to the driveway where Francine first arrived, she reflects on the circular nature of life's journeys. The room that once felt like a prison now feels like home. The journal that once captured her loneliness now overflows with connection and possibility. The voice that was silenced for decades now carries far beyond the walls of Whispering Pines, touching hearts and changing minds about what it means to grow old with dignity and purpose. Francine's journey from overlooked to influential reminds everyone that a person's value never diminishes with age. Sometimes the most powerful voices are those that society has been too busy to hear. Congratulations! Type 9 in the comments, so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.